Hello listeners, we are your co-hosts Janine Bailey and Marie Quigley for the Empower World Coaching and Leadership Podcast. Empower World brings guests who are making a difference to the world to inspire coaches and leaders who lead with mind, heart and soul.
Hello and welcome to Empower World's Coaching and Leadership Podcast. My name's Marie Quigley, and as you know, you can see I'm here on my own today without my lovely business partner. But I am talking to the wonderful Velvey Blocker, who's Director of Executive Coaching at Black & Veatch. And Velvey's been leading global leadership development programs for professionals, supervisors, managers, and executives for over 25 years. Welcome to the podcast, Velvey.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Well, I was excited very at the get-go to meet you. So I probably met you over a year and a half ago now, maybe, Velvey. And one of your staff members was searching for an executive or leadership coach. And I was one of the coaches in the mix to have a chemistry session. And I was fortunate enough to have been chosen. And I met you once that decision had been made by the coachee as part of the onboarding process. And having worked with many companies throughout my time, I was actually quite blown away by the process that you offered me as an external coach and how smooth it felt coming into your organization with all the processes that you had in place. And I know so many coaches ask about, how do I get into executive coaching? What's behind the screen? Almost like the Wizard of Oz, what's behind the screen? And I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful, because my experience was so powerful, if you and I got together and had a conversation about all things to do with executive leadership coaching.
Wow, I love the idea, and I appreciate the nice compliment. I do think, it's really a great opportunity that Black & Veatch has put the investment to have someone like myself oversee coaching to the level that we're able to do here. And it does certainly have a big payoff on the return on investment, I think. So that was nice to hear. And and it was also, I'll just add, it was nice that as we were kind of vetting you as a coach and your programs and what you do, it was a very nice fit. There wasn't much to switch or change up at all. So
oh, that's lovely feedback for me to hear as well, Velvey. So we had this synergy because obviously I've been doing this for a long time and you've been doing this for a long time. And somebody who wants to get into the field of executive or leadership coaching, what is the difference between other forms of coaching and what you are looking at?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's one that I try to help others understand here and outside of Black & Veatch. And honestly, for years, I was trying to make sure I had a good understanding so I could explain it to others well. With all the leadership programming I've done and facilitation and workshops all over the world, really, taking high potentials and officers in companies through experiences, there's always, in my opinion, some of the best parts of those programs were the coaching that they would get along with the program. Now, sometimes the coaching was aligned with objectives in the program. Sometimes it was aligned with their own development objectives, but I consider that more what I'd call leadership coaching. And earlier in my career, there was probably even more academic coaching towards the objectives of a program. But as my ability and certifications and experience evolved too, I got more into what I call leadership coaching, which to me can be a little bit more targeted. It doesn't necessarily have to be over a long span of time, can be, but it's not necessarily following a kind of a framework of what, like, say, an executive coaching framework should have, in my opinion, to ensure healthy outcomes between the professional that's seeking or looking for a coach. And in my case, in the company, which also wants to see a return on investment for the expense they're making, because it is a healthy expense. And so putting some transparency and accountability in the process was kind of paramount for us here. I think when you're working outside of a company or someone just seeking you as an executive coach, you don't necessarily have to follow all of the same kinds of parameters to ensure all the transparency and accountabilities that other leaders would like to see. So that changes the nature of the executive coaching a bit, but I still think there's some elements that should stay to ensure it's effective, elements that you use in your programming, for instance. So I don't know if that was quite on the nose, Maria, what you were asking, but there's at least some start.
Yeah, it certainly is, Velvey. And I have to say for our listeners, it's important for them to know that you're also a trained coach. So you know what's expected of the process. And I think that was an addition for me. You understood what was required, and you used the same language that I did when we were coming together. And I really noticed the fact that you were trained as a coach adds an additional layer to the onboarding understanding of that.
It certainly helps, I think. Could someone else do what I'm doing? Yes. Someone else could do it. Many people could do it better, I'm sure. Having the lens of being a coach and have the experience and training and certification also allows me to have maybe a little bit further, say, look under the hood to see if the coach understands what a real coaching experience is versus they are saying they're a coach, but they're maybe more of an advisor or a consultant, and they're more apt to give ideas and feedback and counseling versus the powerful process of executive coaching and coaching, which is asking great questions, helping reframe, and helping people move forward through their challenges. I can see that because of the experience and training, maybe a little quicker or more nuanced.
Yeah, so that is fascinating that you're able to see that. So is it important for your organization, because let's focus on your organization because you do it the way you do because it's yours. Is it important for coaches to be credentialed, to have experience? What are you looking for when you're thinking about bringing an executive coach on board?
Another great question. I do think it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be a certain like ICF certification, in my opinion, because there's good certifications out there. The ICF being kind of the, largest body with ethical standards of compliance and things is a nice, kind of entry to ensure that okay, well, I don't know if they're abiding by ICF certification standards and ethics, but at least I see they have that. So at least it's a little bit of initial trust that they understand, the differences, because I've worked with some coaches who have had really good impact that don't have some of those standards. And because they don't follow them, it can end up making a bit of a mess if they are not aware that what they should and shouldn't be sharing confidentially. And with well-meaning and well-intent, they can create a bit of a mess for me or others to have to clean up because they didn't understand, especially if they got involved with more than one executive in their coaching process. So it just allows me to have a level of comfort that they understand confidentiality, they understand the process, and I'm not going to have to come back and say, hey, for instance, you probably shouldn't be advising the executive on these types of activities. You're moving more to an advisor role than you are a coach at this point. So it just makes it a little more easy. Plus, if they've had some kind of certification that's a good executive coaching certification based on good executive coaching standards, you also know that hopefully they're following some kind of process to help people move forward, and they're hopefully not getting into being an advisor or a consultant, which I've seen that happen often. Now, is it okay to go into an advisor or consultant mode if they ask? Certainly. But you want to go out of that as quickly as possible back to your coach situation as often as you can.
Yeah, I love that. And I know when we're training coaches, we say, if you are moving into the role of advisor, you need to differentiate it from coaching, because it's a way of being with somebody.
Earlier, sorry, I just interrupted you. It just got me thinking about a funny thing. When I first started, to help me differentiate, I would say, just to help myself, honestly, to make sure I wasn't going into coaching, because I've run training programs and facilitated for years. So it's very easy for me to go into, well, let me just tell you how to do this. So to help myself, I would say, okay, are you asking me to put on my consultant's hat here and give you some ideas to consider? Yes. Okay. I'll do that for a few moments, but then I'm going to go back to my coaching role. So here's what I'm thinking. I'll let you think of whether or not that's useful for you versus telling you need to do this. And then, okay, I'm going to take my consultant's hat off and I'm going back to a coach now. That was useful for me to make sure I was holding myself to a standard.
Yeah, love it. One of the competencies, staying in the role of the coach so that the client really understands what coaching is. And if you move out of it, to name it. It's very clear.
Yes.
I think for me, when working with executives, because I work across so many fields and I am not an expert in the field, it's really easy for me to stay in the role of a coach, because a lot of the things that they're talking about, their projects, etc., I have no understanding of. But I trust that, if particularly we're working on behavioral transformation, that the client's wisdom is the key, that you're not going to serve anything.
Love that.
Yeah. So thinking, so you've seen the coach, or before you meet the coach, your coachees have a chemistry session with more than one coach generally, correct, Velvey? If that's, I'm thinking back.
No. When I put the framework together here for Black and Veatch, I was working with someone who's retired now and a brilliant coach themselves, and had run OE for many years at several organizations. And we tried to decide, like, how many, we want people to feel a choice. Like, I don't think it's always a good engaging, I should say, or engaging way to say, here's your coach. But then how many, because these are very busy executives, they may or may not have time. And an engineering company, giving him too many coaches could be a little overwhelming at times, because some of them have never had one and they don't know how to select. So we kind of tightened it down to 2 or 3. 2 felt like almost a forced choice. 3 felt about right. So depending on how busy they are, the level of trust, how much I understand their situation, we usually go for, 3 bios, but I've done it where I've just given them a couple because that's what they want. They said, just give me a couple that you feel really good about. Now, what we also do is give them an option to say, I interviewed both of them for a chemistry call. Do you have any others I could look at? This one coach seems like they'd be all right, but I'd really like to maybe check out someone that has this amount of experience or this background or this. And then they can decide. That ability to choose their coach, I think, is a really important factor up front.
Yeah, I feel the same. I think I said to you when we first met, I really want to ensure I'm the right coach. So I would like them to have another choice. And you said, that's our process. So yeah, it's really important for me as a coach to know that they're choosing, or they have the choice, and that they're choosing me to partner with them for the right reasons.
Yes.
Okay, so the client says yes, the coach says yes, they come to you. What's your onboarding process? How do you have a conversation with the executive coach to bring them on board into your system?
Yeah, good question. So part of that happens before we ever go to the chemistry with many of the external coaches, and some of it happens during and after the selection. Up front, this is something that it's maybe a little unique. Not every company does this. I will do an intake with the executive up front to find out what are their challenges, what are their goals for coaching. Have they had a coach in recent years? Have they had any assessments recently that I can draw from an HR and take a look at and say, hey, are you okay if we use, it looks like you had this, this personality assessment or this leadership assessment a couple years ago. I bet your coach would appreciate some of that. So just trying to make sure I'm as informed as possible as I go to find a coach. And then when I go to find a coach, it's looking for something that kind of falls in the ballpark of someone that I think will be someone they want to select, but also someone that will challenge them to be even greater than they think they are. I think that's a great quality of a good coach match. So oftentimes they'll want a certain background. We both know that that's often they're looking for more of an advisor in those situations than a coach. But I'll try to appease that if it's enough to help them mentally assent to this person can probably, give me some good questions and help move me forward. There's a certain amount of just, is this coach going to be able to meet me at the table with my experience? And it's a little bit of an ego thing too. If I can see that I can tip my hat to this person, I might be open to being vulnerable. So there's a little bit of a play there, depending on the person I'm working with. To get more specific to your question though, onboarding, I just try to find out, what is their background, credentialing, what is their process. I describe our process, and like with you and I, Maria, it was very easy. I would say, here's the parts of our process. You're like, yep, I do that already. So I think we're good. It was just so easy. But then onboarding is just the process of, getting them into our system. I won't, belabor any of that part as far as, payments and negotiating contracts. And we have a standard, consulting contract that some consultants will use, and some have one that they want us to take a look at, and we'll put it through our legal department. But then just ensuring up front that depending on the level of the executive too, that they understand that there's certain parts of our process that we want to make sure that they follow and understand. One is we prefer verbal 360s over an online 360, for instance. It allows the coach to get a little peek into the culture, some of the stakeholders. We also like to have the stakeholders approved by the supervisor, which is the sponsor for the role. And the supervisor or sponsor could be the CEO, president, depends on the level we're moving. Because what you don't want to come back with is, once there's an alignment meeting, the sponsor saying, well, hang on, how come you didn't interview this person over here? They have really good insights. So we try to get that approval process for the stakeholders, and we try to ensure that they understand that there's either a development alignment, meeting after the self-awareness phase, where you use a 360 and some kind of instrument like a Hogan for personality and traits, or many of them actually helps them to have just a kickoff right up front. Here we all together. What are our goals, and what are we going to accomplish? And then if there's a good relationship with the leader and the executive, they can cover off on the goal alignment. Well, here's the two things that I feel are the most important for me to focus on. So you have good leader agreement. Are those some of the things you were looking for in your question, or did I miss some of that?
No, that's lovely to hear, because I vividly remember having that verbal 360s with a certain number of people that my client, my coachee had chosen, but also their supervisors had recommended. And that process was really powerful, as you said, to get a peek inside the window, which a written feedback doesn't always give you. And having human to human conversation for me was a wonderful experience, and something I recommend to organizations, but they don't often have the capacity to allow that to happen in the process.
Yeah, I had was asking a coach on the onboarding process, do you use a verbal 360? And they said, oh yeah, I don't use the blunt instrument of a online 360. I thought that was kind of a funny way to put it. I still need to use that for some situations I'm in internally, but it is a bit more of a blunt instrument because when you get the information from an online 360, and I've done literally hundreds of them at this point in my career, there's too many holes in that process to really understand behaviorally where to focus in on, where a coach can ask follow-up questions, get real specific about behaviors, and deliver a much more complete package when you go through that behavioral 360 process with a verbal 360. One other element I didn't mention is we typically like to have our lead HR partners involved too, because they have context for succession planning, talent reviews. They may understand some of the unique challenges this leader is getting ready to go through that leader may not even know with upcoming org changes, or they've got their overall, development focus too, and know that, well, they've been in this role for a couple years, they probably are going to have a new challenge or rotation coming up. And so just the context of having them as part of the process to be a development partner in the goal alignment meeting or the kickoff, but it definitely in what we also like to do is the midpoint check-in, like how are we doing progress-wise, get some feedback from the leader. HR partners sometimes may have some ideas or feedback from what they're seeing. And then in the transition meeting at the end of the engagement, whether it's a 6, 9, or year-long engagement. So usually we like to try to get the HR partner involved because they have such good long-term viewpoints, where a supervisor, they may change with whoever their direct supervisor, manager, leader, whatever you call it, your company is. So
yeah, that's been my experience. So having the HR partners involved in the 360 has been very beneficial. And you mentioned these check-ins, these 3 monthly or quarterly check-ins, however they happen. They're so essential to see for the development of the coachee on their program as well, because it really helps hone the goals, hone the focus for the session, and see the progress that's being made, and then see if there's any more goals or focus that needs to be looked at.
yes.
How do you ensure that the coach is adhering to confidentiality around sharing information, Velvey, when you arrange these midpoint or quarter point sessions for feedback?
That's a good question. I because I'm not involved in those. Now I do check in with the coach and the coachee throughout the engagement, just to see how things are going. Is that things working with the coach? Any support you need from me through the process. And if anything came up like that during those check-ins that they were concerned about, they might share that with me. But in terms of confidentiality, or is your question about confidentiality within the scope of that meeting, of that check-in right there? Yeah. I haven't had any issues with that I know of. And I don't know if I had a great answer for that, other than one of either the HR partner or the sponsor, or maybe even the coachee, might share that back with me if they had concerns.
Great to hear that. You're aware of that, and you're obviously hiring coaches who you will check on their processes for confidentiality, not just in communicating, but how they keep their notes for the client to make sure it's safe and confidential.
Yes.
One of the things I really appreciated with this engagement with your organization was the fact that you had, as part of the coaching program, you've aligned sessions so that the coach can sit in with meetings for the executive and observe and provide feedback on what they've noticed. That's been invaluable to the executive I'm working with. Is that another way of working, Velvey?
that happens in many engagements where, we'll ask the coachee to invite them in. And some of them just want to do that anyway. Matter of fact, I just had an executive say, hey, I want a coach who's going to be willing to spend a little time, kind of observing me in different contexts. So I think that's helpful because, as you know, and the listeners here, when you're working with someone, you're getting and believing that they are telling the truth. But they're telling their truth. And there's other truths out there that they may not be aware of. And so it does give you a little bit of a glimpse into the other truths that could be around them that they aren't seeing, ignoring, or maybe don't care about. And so that I do find that very helpful in part of the process. And it can involve a little bit of feedback, which is a little bit different part of an executive coaching engagement, where it's like, well, here's what I saw. Are you open to hearing some of these themes that I saw during the meeting? Typically aligned to their coaching goals is where I like to go with that. Another process, if you don't mind, if I just iterate here a moment, that helps with the, maybe just getting out of just the client's truth is, of course, the great Marshall Goldsmith's process of having stakeholder check-ins. Internally, I do it with just about everyone that I'm working with. If it's an executive coaching engagement, even some of my leadership coaching, if it's a smaller several weeks, I'll still ask them to find a caring critic, maybe 4 or 5, and check in and just say, here's what I'm working on. I want to thank you for your feedback during the, 360 process. Based on what I heard, I'm working on this and this. And just kind of a quick, it doesn't have to be more than 5 minutes to check in of how am I doing? Is there anything I need to do more or less of? And this gets them a space out of just our coaching engagement and the truth that they're sharing there. And my challenge is to them to see and hear from people they work with and get way more access to their daily, weekly behaviors. It also tells those around them that I'm taking the time you spent seriously and your feedback seriously, and it can build psychological safety around them and their culture by sharing that they're working on something and appreciate their support. So,
yeah, I love that. And what that shows me is that the organization is brave because it's willing to do things like this. So if the organization's brave, the people within it tend to be a bit braver. And it takes courage to keep going back and asking for feedback and stretch zones and uncovering our blind spots. And
yes.
Certainly with the executive I'm working with, he's incredibly courageous in asking for that thing called feedback and listening and then implementing it in the way he's working. So that's quite inspiring from an organization and a systemic process that you encourage that.
Yeah, I think, in small ways, I'm trying to help encourage even more of that because it's not, necessarily easy for everyone, but I rarely met an executive that's like, oh, I can't do that. They're very much like, oh, okay, you know what? Yeah, I'm in, I'll do it. Yeah. So yeah, they're open to it, but it may not have been something they've done a lot before. So I feel like it's helping to build culture in a little bit of way and intellectual bravery. Through their leadership and their leadership shadow they're leaving.
Yeah, you said something earlier in the conversation about the ability to challenge the coach, kind of confidence to challenge the person or to be an equal with the person that they're coaching. From my perspective, I think, and as an executive coach, that is essential. The coach has to be grounded in themselves to be able to say, look, I'm noticing something. Can I share this with you? And have a tough conversation, a challenging conversation. I'll often say to people, we're not somebody's friend. We're their thinking partner. And that means we have to challenge things. And in order to do that, we need to trust ourselves and our profession to be able to stay in our own space. Does that make sense?
Yes. Oh, makes so much sense, and it reminds me of so many times when I thought back and thought, this almost feels like a phone a friend, situation early in, because I haven't challenged them enough. And when I haven't, when I actually do need to, it feels almost a little disruptive. Like, I've been letting them vent too much or get too much off their chest without challenging them. Now, I try to challenge them, but maybe they didn't hear it and they keep going and doing what they're doing. So they almost feel like the coaching is a place to dump their emotional baggage or the stress they're under, which certainly that space can be used a little bit, but you've got to move to the challenge and helping them move forward. So what you said there is maintaining your own space. I'm not here necessarily to be your friend. I'm here to help challenge you to move forward. I really appreciate that perspective. And those are the kinds of coaches we like working with here.
I hear that. And so we've got a couple of minutes. But this is an important question that organizations often ask. How are you going to measure success? How are we going to know that this investment we're putting into this executive is working? How do we track our return on investment? So how do you do it, Velvey, in Back and Veatch?
It's not always easy, but when it is, it's like, okay, this clearly worked. The ones that are a little easier, you can see the motivation and the executive leaning into the feedback and coming to the coaching engagements with, look, I'm serious about this. These focus areas that I aligned with my leader on and my HR partner on, I'm taking these seriously, and here's what I've done. And by the way, you said the stakeholder check-ins, they're all over it. They're checking in like, I talked to this person about these areas. This one's not seeing much change. These two are seeing some small changes, but they want to see more. And there's just a different engagement about it. And then when you get to the midpoint where the leader and HR partner get to weigh in on what did you set out to do and how are you doing on it, you can sense the engagement from them. Even like, it's very clear that Tom has taken this seriously, and we've already heard from his stakeholders how much of a difference they're seeing. And then when you get to the transition or the end of the engagement discussion with the same people, it's the same kind of a conversation, that the level of new behaviors they wanted to see, they're hitting them, and they're ready to move on to new ones. Or maybe they need to elevate the same ones to another level because they're getting ready to get promoted. Yeah. That's some of the kind of more behavioral and you could say anecdotal ROI. To go further than that, we do on some engagements do a pre and a post survey with the stakeholders to ask them what they are currently seeing. And some of those are aligned with what they'll hear in the 360 or questions they'll get there. And then make sure and ask the same questions around the same kinds of focus areas towards the end to see what the behavior change was. Yeah. I've done that too, not at the onset of an engagement, but maybe after they get the focus areas aligned, so you can really dial in your questions a little closer, and then do it again at the end of the engagement and even a few months out to see if there's a sustained, behavior change. Or did they kind of go back under pressure to their old habits?
Yeah. One thing I think is important for listeners to recognize is, you've got highly talented people, and the investment you're putting in executive coaching is because you want them to be even better. So We're talking about moving people to become the best potential. So we're not talking about remedial work. We're talking about, you've got great people. You want them to succeed. You want them to impact the organization in a deeper way. And it's a win-win for everybody, isn't it?
Yes. And we tell them this is to help the strong get even stronger. We're trying not to work with, any performance management or the manager hasn't given feedback and they're trying to outsource their accountability of giving feedback to a 360 process and a coach. We try to, in my process that I undertake, I work with HR partner to ensure that the candidates we're coaching are well suited for it, usually aligned to talent pool development.
Love it. Velvey, our time is coming to an end. If you could say one thing to a coach who wanted to move into executive coaching, what advice would you give them?
One thing, I'll have to stop and think for a minute. Well, one piece of advice, I guess I'll go with probably a pretty common answer here is get certified by an institution that's recognized by ICF. Go through and embrace the training. Some of the people I went through were checking a box because they've been coaches for a while, and you could tell they weren't embracing it. They knew they needed to have it though to have a little higher credential to get in, but they will also help you with the process and the kind of structure of good executive coaching. And on the other side, if you embrace it, no matter how far along you are in your coaching, you'll have some other people you went through with that you'll learn from and get to practice with, which I think is really important no matter where you're at. I'm just going to cheat and say along with that, make sure you have a coach and or a therapist that you can talk to, because you carry a weight of listening to people and challenging them. And if you do it enough, you need to make sure you have an outlet and someone to help give you a perspective. Just like Marie, you and I have at times, even today before this call, to be able to have a space.
Absolutely, Velvey. And have a mentor coach to listen into your work. Have a supervisor that you can bring your client work to think about it in a different way. So, Velvey, we're coming to the end of our time today, and I know we could talk all day about all things coaching together, as we have been able to do many times before. But if you could share one piece of advice or something that a coach who's wanting to move into executive coaching should think about, what would be one thing you would let them know?
I would say start with getting yourself credentialed in ICF. As I mentioned earlier in our discussion, it doesn't mean you're a great coach. It just does help you get in the door a little easier with many firms or clients to be able to see you have that credentialing. They at least have an element of trust that you've been through that program. When I went through it, I was going through it with many coaches who had been coaching for years at the C-suite level, but really knew that was something they needed to get under their belt. So I would say start that now. And if I can add, if I can cheat a little bit and add one more piece of advice, I would say the one of the books that has helped me the most with my coaching, Coactive Coaching, was certainly a great book, and we actually use that in my certification in ICF. But the book, and I bet many of your listeners already know about this, The Heart of Laser Focused Coaching by Miriam Franklin. It's kind of a life changer for me, because she would go through scenarios in the book that I thought, yeah, that's about how I would do it. And then she would say, now here's what a laser focused coach would do. It would be up a whole other level. So what a challenging, great, coach she is, and she spells out things really well in her book. So there's two. I know you just asked for one.
Love it. Love it that you've got over and above, Velvey. And I highly endorse those books as well as another one. Can't remember the author. I think it's Mary Beth Shewan and it's called Executive Coaching with Heart and Backbone, something like that.
Oh, okay. I appreciate that recommendation. I've heard of that one and I have not read it. So
yeah, that was an impactful book early on in my career. So yes, hope I've got the name right. If I don't, apologize to the author. It was a super book. So thank you, Velvey. Appreciate the time you've given to us and our audience today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, as I'm sure our listeners will do. Listeners, thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please share it with other coaches or other people interested in coaching. If you'd like to connect with Velvey, Velvey, how can they do that?
Oh, I'd love to talk with anyone that wants to chat through the any questions you have, or just to make a connection. My email is pretty simple. It's Velvey, VELVEY @outlook.com. So 2 V's in that name, VEL and a VEY @outlook.com. And I look forward to connecting with anyone.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Velvey. Thank you for listening in, everybody, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next episode.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. You can find out more about us on our website, www.empower-world.com, and on our social media networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Be empowered.